Welcome back to Mysteries Crime Stories, the channel where we dive into the darkest crimes, the strangest cases, and the mysteries that have haunted generations. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss these mysteries. Tell us in the comments what you think about the cases we cover, what you'd like to see in future videos, and share this story with anyone who would find it important. Now, let's begin. Story number 3. The New Nanny. In the late 1980s, in a quiet, tree-lined suburb outside of Chicago, the Harris family lived what many would consider an ordinary life. Daniel and Rebecca Harris had steady jobs, a comfortable home, and a 5-year-old daughter named Emily. Like most young families, their days were a blur of school drop-offs, late meetings, grocery runs, and exhaustion. When Rebecca was offered a promotion that required more travel, the family decided they needed help. A nanny seemed like the best solution. They placed an ad in the local paper and received dozens of responses, but one stood out: a woman named Claire, who described herself as warm, experienced, and a lover of children. Her first meeting with the Harris family was almost too perfect. Claire appeared punctual, polite, and seemed to know exactly how to engage Emily. She asked the right questions, listened attentively, and offered thoughtful answers. Rebecca felt her nerves ease. Daniel, however, couldn't shake a subtle unease. Something about Claire's manner felt rehearsed, like she was performing a role rather than being herself. Still, the decision was made. Claire moved into the spare bedroom a week later. At first, everything seemed fine. Emily appeared happy, even excited, to spend her afternoons with Claire. The house was always spotless when Rebecca came home, and Claire seemed to anticipate every need. But gradually, cracks began to show. Emily started to mention odd things, her toys being rearranged in ways she hadn't left them, stories Claire told her about children who never came home, and whispers in her room at night. Rebecca brushed it off as childhood imagination, but Daniel began noticing things too. One evening, while returning home earlier than expected, he found Claire in the kitchen, not preparing dinner but rifling through the family's personal files. When confronted, Claire smiled and claimed she was looking for Emily's medical records. Daniel felt unsettled, but without a proof of wrongdoing, he let it go. Weeks later, Rebecca returned from a business trip and noticed Emily had developed a new habit: locking her bedroom door at night. When asked why, the little girl only said, "Because Claire comes in and just stares at me." Alarmed, Rebecca confronted Claire, who denied everything with calm confidence. She reminded Rebecca how much the family relied on her and suggested Emily might simply be acting out because of her mother's absences. But the final straw came one cold November night. Daniel woke to the sound of footsteps outside Emily's room. When he opened the door, he found Claire standing motionless in the dark hallway, her face blank, her hand hovering inches from the doorknob. When Daniel demanded an explanation, Claire muttered something incoherent and retreated to her room. The next morning, the Harris family asked her to leave. Claire went without protest. Weeks later, they discovered the unsettling truth. Claire wasn't her real name. She had applied under false credentials, and her past employers had lodged similar complaints, stories of her obsession with children, her nighttime visits, and her manipulative behavior. Although Emily was safe, the Harris family never truly recovered from the feeling of having let a stranger so close to their lives. For them, the lesson was a haunting one. Evil can arrive at your doorstep with a polite smile and a carefully crafted resume. Story number 2. A Friendly Wave. In the summer of 1978, in a small Midwestern town, 12-year-old Anna was delivering newspapers along her usual route. She had biked the streets since she was 8, and every house felt familiar. The routine gave her comfort. One house in particular always caught her attention. It was an old, 2-story farmhouse at the end of Maple Lane, owned by a retired railroad worker named Mr. Whitaker. He was known to be friendly, but reclusive. Whenever Anna passed, she often saw him on the porch, sipping coffee or tinkering with tools. One morning, as Anna tossed the paper onto his lawn, she noticed something odd. Mr. Whitaker was there, leaning against the porch railing, one arm lifted high in a frozen wave. His smile looked strained, but his hand remained up. Anna waved back politely and continued her route. The next morning, she saw the exact same thing. Mr. Whitaker, standing in the same position, arm raised, as if locked in place. She waved again, but this time unease crept into her chest. On the third day, her curiosity got the better of her. Instead of biking past, she stopped at the edge of the lawn. "Morning, Mr. Whitaker," she called. He didn't respond, his arm still raised in that unnatural wave. His head seemed to tilt oddly, his skin pale under the sunlight. Shaken, she rode home and told her parents. Her father agreed to check on him later that day. When he returned, his face was grim. He explained that Mr. Whitaker had passed away several days earlier. His body had collapsed against the railing in such a way that his arm remained suspended in the air, appearing as though he was still waving. The community was stunned. For days, neighbors had driven by, some even waving back, believing the old man was greeting them cheerfully. No one realized they were acknowledging a corpse slowly decaying in the summer heat. Anna would never forget that image. What haunted her wasn't just the discovery itself, but the chilling idea that so many had looked and seen what they wanted to see. A friendly neighbor waving hello, when in reality, death had been standing right in front of them. Story Nutker 1. Just Teeth, on the outskirts of rural Nebraska. In the 1990s, a farmer named Mark Jensen was clearing a section of land behind his barn. The soil was rich but often yielded odd debris from decades of use. Rusty tools, broken bottles, the remnants of old farm life. On one particularly hot afternoon, while digging through the earth, Mark's shovel struck something hard. At first, he assumed it was just another rock, but when he bent down and brushed away the dirt, his breath caught. What emerged was a human jawbone, with several teeth still intact. Horrified, Mark called the authorities. The local sheriff's department cordoned off the area and began excavating. What they uncovered was not a single bone, but a shallow grave filled with scattered remains. Most of the skeleton was missing, but dozens of teeth, broken, worn, and stained, were left behind, as though the body had been deliberately destroyed. Forensic teams struggled to identify the victim. There were no intact records to match the teeth against, and no local missing persons report seemed to fit the discovery. The few fragments of bone suggested the remains belonged to a woman in her 30s or 40s. Rumors began to swirl in the small community. Some recalled a drifter woman who had been seen around the area years earlier, asking for work. Others whispered about old feuds between neighboring farmers, about secrets buried not only in soil but in silence. Months dragged into years, and the case grew cold. The only consistent piece of evidence were those teeth, each one catalogued, bagged, and stored, but offering no answers. Without DNA technology advanced enough at the time, the woman remained a mystery. Decades later, with the arrival of modern forensic science, the case was reopened. The teeth were tested, and genealogical research pointed investigators to a family line hundreds of miles away. The remains were eventually identified as belonging to a woman named Linda, who had vanished in the mid-1980s while hitchhiking across the Midwest. The discovery devastated her family, who had spent years wondering what became of her. But for the Nebraska town, the case remained shrouded in unease. No one was ever charged, and Linda's killer was never identified. The farm where her remains were found eventually changed hands, but the land carried a dark reputation. Locals whispered about the patch of ground where just teeth had once been unearthed, a chilling reminder of how the earth itself sometimes holds the only testimony of forgotten crimes. Each of these stories reveals the disturbing truth that horror is not always distant, not always hidden in shadows. Sometimes it enters our homes disguised as help, sometimes it lingers unnoticed in plain sight, and sometimes it lies buried, waiting for decades to speak again. In the Harris household, trust in a stranger almost turned sinister. On Maple Lane, a wave that seemed like a gesture of kindness masked the silence of death. And in the Nebraska fields, a collection of teeth spoke for a woman who could no longer tell her story. These tales remind us that reality can be more haunting than fiction, because every one of them truly happened.